Joining us now is the former Speaker of the House and Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich. For 20 years, Speaker Gingrich represented Atlanta's northern suburbs when he served as a congressman for Georgia's 6th congressional district. Good to have you with us, Newt. Thank you very much for being here today.
Good to be with you.
So, you know, I was watching you last night on Laura Ingram's show, and you clearly are very upset about what you see playing out across the country in some of our cities. Can you elaborate on that, explain that to our viewers here today, midday?
Sure. We have, look, at Gingrich 360, we've been getting emails and from people all over the country. We just this morning got one alleging that there were 1,400 dead people voting in Michigan. We've begun checking it. The first 10 people we looked up, in fact, were dead and did vote quite successfully. And so we're now going through the whole list of 1,400. We've had all sorts of strange things happening. From a Georgia perspective, Savannah magically finds 15,000 votes that they had somehow misplaced. I have grave doubt. You know, you can talk all you want to about what they finally did in Philadelphia several days after they had a court order insisting that they do it. But in Fulton County, Georgia, for example, they were blocking people from coming as observers. In some parts of the country, they actually were putting up covers of the windows so you couldn't even look in. And I just would suggest to you that there's an awful lot of this kind of thing going on. And we keep getting reports from a variety of citizens, including in Philadelphia, of allegations that are, at least at a minimum, have to be thoroughly looked at before you can say that this election is over. And I just think that it's remarkable. For example, in Philadelphia, they had one dump of 23,000 ballots. This is from 538, which is hardly a pro-Trump organization. But they reported 23,000 ballots, 0 for Trump. Now, it's very hard. I mean, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in Cuba, you might get in China, you might get these results. There are very few places I know in American history where you get a 23,000 to 0. So I think for those of us who are skeptical, and we're watching, by the way, as the internet giants are literally cutting people off. Rush Limbaugh yesterday had 4 out of 6 tweets that were cut off. So I think if you're a conservative, you really do have this sense that something very fishy is going on and that everything possible is being done to suppress looking into it. So we'll see. I think this could easily run 2 or 3 weeks and maybe longer, depending on what we discover.
Mr. Speaker, I understand what you're saying as people are looking into this. And each one of these states, especially Georgia, you have a Republican governor and a Republican Secretary of State. They are coming out and briefing. They have not seen widespread fraud as of yet. If you're finding things, they're probably going to look into it because there's going to be a recount. But for the president to come out the other night and say definitively in that press conference that Democrats are stealing the election, that there is fraud, doesn't that hurt the system overall? Even if he believes it, to say it without showing what that is, doesn't it hurt to have the President of the United States doing that?
Well, look, I think it hurts, but I think it also hurts if you have that level of fraud. I think
we
it
haven't
hurts
seen it.
When you have people the size of what?
We haven't seen that.
I'm sorry?
We haven't seen that level of fraud. He's saying it's there, but we haven't seen it.
Okay. Yeah, but look at the double standard. So you have a precinct where they don't let anyone in. They board it up. In some cases, they actually have put a tractor in front of the door. But we're supposed to say, oh, I'm sure that's an honest precinct, and they're just misunderstood. Well, my view is the exact opposite. If you break the law, and by the way, it's breaking the law to not allow these poll watchers, why should we trust you? I mean, what reasons do we have to assume that people who are keeping us out, operating in secret, are in fact being faithful? And I personally, having been born in Harrisburg, look, I would take every precinct that blocked the poll watchers, and I would just not count their votes. I have no reason to believe that those precincts are honest. They have by definition proven they were covering up something. So the burden ought to be on them to prove that they're being honest.
Without
as I told you a minute ago,
how they're not honest?
Well, Okay, so somebody very cleverly, I mean, somebody quite cleverly, if you saw The Irishman, you'll understand part of this.
I saw it.
They quite cleverly make sure that they make sure that you can't prove what they're doing, and therefore, by definition, they can't be guilty, even if what they're doing is totally criminal.
So let me ask you this.
Now, I think that's a pretty high burden. There's a pretty high burden to trust systems that have had a long history. I mean, Philadelphia has had a long history of corruption.
But we trusted them 4 years ago when Donald
burden.
Trump won in Pennsylvania by just a short margin. We trusted the system 4 years ago. Understand it's different with mail-in ballots this time and the coronavirus, but 4 years ago, the margins were very tight, Mr. Speaker, and the system was fine.
And the difference was 4 years ago, the counties that President Trump was getting his majority in were virtually all open, smaller counties that did not have a history of corruption. And so it didn't do the Democrats any good to go into these smaller rural counties and try to find something they knew wasn't there. This is a very different, in Milwaukee, in Detroit, in Atlanta, and in Philadelphia. I think there's a lot that at a minimum deserves a very serious look. Well, and I think, frankly, the way we're currently doing it puts a huge burden on, it puts a great burden on innocent people and offers great protection to people who want to be thieves.
Well, we've seen, it's not just Philadelphia. We've seen these other counties that went for President Trump last time around that have flipped back to being blue, as Pennsylvania has been for many years. So, but you do raise there's a good point here about how we do this, right? And I think that's going to, no matter what happens, that is going to require a huge reevaluation. And I asked Ronna McDaniel, and I'll ask you, we just have a couple seconds left, Speaker Gingrich, but, why weren't there more Republicans when it started, when the vote count began? Because we heard lawyers were spread out across the country, that poll watchers were spread out across the country, saying you cannot start counting this vote. Don't begin counting this vote until we are set and ready to go and both sides are good with the situation.
Right. And I think that Ronna reported to you, we had the watchers in Detroit, we had the watchers in Philadelphia, we had the watchers in Atlanta, and they were physically excluded. It wasn't that there wasn't a watcher there. That's why we know they were excluded, because there was a watcher there. So it wasn't a failure to provide a watcher. They were literally being physically excluded by the machine so that it could cheerfully do whatever it's doing. You may decide to give them the benefit of the doubt. You tell me why they were covering up the windows with paper. Tell me why they were blocking the doors.
It's very suspicious. I
people?
Completely agree with you. All of that behavior is highly suspicious, and we need more transparency in all of these places. You want all these people's votes to count.
We'll go back and count the votes and see.
All right.
But this is going to be several weeks.
Thank you, sir. Good to have you with us. Ongoing, continuing story.